It feels a little formal to use the microphone, but we're just, to make sure everyone can hear us sufficiently, we'll use microphones. Just want to say hello and thank and introduce myself. I'm State Senator Eric Lesser, and I have nothing formal to say or to introduce because it's a town hall. We're going to just go straight to questions. The only thing I ask is two things. Number one, questions do end in question marks. So please remember that. We want to be respectful of everyone who's here, and we want to make sure that our statements end with question marks. So questions end with question marks. Then the other thing that I would like to just say is we may not and probably will not all agree with each other on every single topic and every single issue. That's okay. This is America. This is a democracy. And what makes us strong and what makes us able to do dialogues like this is to civilly hear each other out, listen to each other's point of view, and respectfully and politely have disagreements. So I just ask that if we get into heated topics, which we of course will, this is politics and this is the world we live in, that's totally fine. There's no question that's off limits. All I ask is that we just all treat each other with a mutual level of respect in the process. And I will do my best to keep my answers as short as possible, although sometimes I could go on a little bit to make sure we get to as many questions as possible. But we will definitely stick around as long as we need to for everyone to feel like they've been heard. And I will hang out also for a little bit if people have more personal issues or constituent, other issues that they're dealing with that they don't feel as comfortable airing to the whole group. I'll be around as well. I want to recognize a few elected officials that are here. Cateri is still here. City Councilor Cateri Walsh, thank you, Cateri, for being here. And I want to recognize as well two friends of mine from the East Long Meadow School Committee, Bill Fonseca. Where's Bill? Bill's still here. And Deirdre Mayu. Deirdre, thank you for being here. And we had, there is Ms. Caruana from the Wilbraham School Committee is here as well. Thank you for coming in. There was a whole group from Wilbraham that was here. I think a bunch of them left, but am I missing anyone? Well, from the school committee, yeah, we don't have. So at this point, we will dive into questions. We have a microphone right on the left that everyone can use. Another reason we need to use the microphone is our great friends at Focus Springfield are here. Let's give a round of applause to Focus Springfield, because this is airing on TV as well for people who can't be here, and we're on Facebook Live, so there's a lot of ways for people to tune in and participate. So with that, people can make their way to the microphone.
I'll go first, but I am going to have to bring this down like this. My name is Karen Lee, and I'm from Springfield, representing Our Revolution. And I have only one question for you. It's kind of loaded. It has to do with student loan debt. And in June at the Democratic State Convention, I wrote an amendment and a resolution, and it was passed by the delegates to fund student loan debt. So it's in the education plank now. There is a bill in the Senate as well as in the House, a companion bill, for an endowment tax on private colleges. So the question is, I read the bill and it appears that it could be used for that, but I don't really know. Yeah. So I have so much more to say on student loan debt. It needs to be forgiven. There's 1 million students in Massachusetts. Harvard alone could pay off the student debt in Massachusetts. They have a $36 billion endowment fund, and the outstanding student debt in Massachusetts is $24 billion. Not picking on Harvard, but that's just one school that could pay off the entire student loan debt. So that's it. Thanks.
Thank you, Karen. Yeah, great question. Everyone heard, obviously, right, because of the microphone. So perfect timing, because I was actually at the State House this morning testifying on a bill I filed, which is the Student Loan Borrowers' Bill of Rights. That bill is not about payment of loan. It's different than your question. I'll get to your specific bill in a second, but just so people know what we testified on at the State House today, this is about a set of common sense protections, a Bill of Rights, so to speak, for student loan borrowers in Massachusetts. What we've seen happen, and who here has student loans or knows people with student loans? This is a common topic. What we've seen happen is basically the way student loans in our country work is they've turned the Department of Education into a massive bank. And the Department of Education issues the loan to the students and then actually passes that off to a servicer. And it's actually the servicer that processes the loan, sends the payment statements, and services, quote unquote, the loan and manages the payment. You have no choice in the matter of who your servicer is. You often don't know who your servicer is. You're not formally notified of who your servicer is, but some of the names that people have probably heard are like Navient, ACS. Those are the biggest players. Navient in Massachusetts is probably the biggest. And they really do a lot of pretty awful stuff. They do stuff like send basically unmarked envelopes, with one piece of paper in them with a little P.O. box and the return address, like hoping that somebody will miss it or not know what it's about so that they can jack up the interest rates as soon as someone misses one payment. I had a constituent actually at our town hall in Ludlow who told me that they were phone banking his daughter on Christmas. They called at like 8 in the morning on Christmas and called over and over and over, like really to harass and intimidate people. This is really awful things. Quite frankly, used car salesmen in Massachusetts have stricter regulations than student loan servicers. It's kind of crazy. There's no licensing regime for them. So this bill would put a licensing regime in place and very importantly would create a student loan ombudsman, basically a one-stop shop for where students could go to get information or to file complaints about student loan harassment. Because right now, if you're a student and you get a call like that on Christmas or you are subject to one of these crazy, awful schemes, it's very ambiguous who you go to. You could go to the Attorney General, you could go to the Consumer Affairs Hotline, you could go to the district attorney, but no one person is completely responsible or really oversees it. So this would make it very clear who's accountable. They would issue licenses to servicers to operate in Massachusetts, and very importantly, they could revoke licenses if people misbehave or don't do what they're supposed to. So that was what we were at the State House for today. On your question about forgiving or paying off existing loans using the endowment tax, I'm actually a co-sponsor of the Senate bill on the endowment tax, where if people aren't familiar with this, it would be a 1.5% levy only on endowments over $1 billion. So there's, I think, 8 or 9 institutions in the state that would fall under this. Harvard, obviously, MIT, I think a couple of the Western Mass private colleges. It's really a very small number, and it creates immense amount of revenue. And the way the bill language is currently written is that it would be dedicated to funding community colleges, which I think is the right approach. Frankly, I'm not sure whether the language as written could apply to paying off existing outstanding loans. It's something we probably need to go back to the bill author to figure out, and if not, it's something we can work through in the committee process. Because I think the idea behind the bill that was filed was we want to spread out some of the wealth here and make sure we're creating pathways of opportunity for everyone in the state. So we would probably have to get involved in a conversation with the bill sponsor. I believe that was sponsored by Senator Donnelly, who unfortunately passed away, but he's been replaced by a wonderful person who I had a meeting with today, Cindy Friedman from Arlington. So we can check in with them about how they're interpreting the language in that bill, but the answer is I'm not sure as it's currently drafted, whether it's broad enough to include that. It's certainly something I would be in favor of.
Can I just have a real quick
Yeah. You can go back to just so that the TV can
Okay,
pick it
real
up.
quick follow-up. I have the list of all the bills that related to student loan debt there on the Senate and the House, and all of those are really good intentions. But the white elephant in the room is the current student debt, and none of these bills even address it. So a reduction of an interest rate is our breadcrumbs. It's not going to work. There's just too much debt out there that needs to be funded, and so I hope you will work on this with me.
No, it's a good project, and I want to just give a shout out and a thank you to Our Revolution, who's been working with us on a lot of different items at the State House. We appreciate it.
Okay.
Anyone else? That's it. Oh, I want to just recognize City Councilor Tim Allen, who walked in. We did acknowledge this earlier, but I want to thank him and appreciate him coming out. Tim.
Good evening. I apologize for being late. I put my watch in the drawer when I retired. I don't know if you've spoken about the empowerment zone stuff, but I do appreciate the fact that you were trying to address the takeover of school districts, but I think your bill actually just is dealing with symptoms. There's two major problems with public education right now that affect places like Springfield and Holyoke and Fall River and New Bedford probably more deeply than any other communities, but it does affect all communities. The first is an accountability system in this district. It's all about shame, blame, and punish. The Betsy DeVosses of the world have, and their ilk, have starved our public schools, created accountability systems that make us look like we're not doing our job, and then pointed the finger at teachers and their unions and saying it's their fault. So the problem with our accountability system is that it's based on MCAS or MCAS 2.0 or PARC, which are criterion reference texts, which means they're a fixed target. They don't actually measure the growth of children towards that target, which is the true measure of what we do in our public schools. And the MCAS and PARC are really crooked yardsticks. And they do have what they laughingly call a growth model. But the growth model that they have takes every child who scored a certain amount on these tests in the whole Commonwealth 1 year, and they compare them to the next year, and then they plot it on a bell curve. Now, anybody who knows anything about statistics, when you have a bell curve, draw the line down the middle, half are going to be failures, half are going to be successful, and it's not actually measuring the individual child's growth. So we need, and there is a bill in the legislation, to put a moratorium on that test and using it to measure the success or failure of school districts, of schools, of students, of teachers. I think that's extremely important. That's the number of the two. Those are one of the two major problems that need to be addressed by the legislature and the governor. The second one is, and it's over 2 years ago when I testified before this committee, the joint House and Senate study of the funding of public education and the Chapter 7 and the foundation formula, their own recommendations. This is 2 years ago. This is the second legislative session where nothing has been done. That study found that our schools are being shortchanged by well over $1 billion a year. In the city of Springfield, the chief financial officer took those recommendations and calculated that's $25 million a year for the children in the Springfield public schools. You know, our state constitution calls on the governor and the legislature to cherish public education. Armed with your own study, you are not cherishing public education. And it is the most needy children. You know, this Commonwealth and this country has recognized we got an opioid problem. Anybody who lives in a place like Springfield or Holyoke or Fall River, we've been dealing with that problem for decades. Not only the problem as it affects individuals, but the underground economy that supports that problem has ravaged neighborhoods and families in our community. The fact of the matter is I spent 45 years as a teacher in the city of Springfield, And I know and have known children who face those kind of challenges, but they're resilient, and given the right circumstances, they can overcome those. But what this accountability system has done in places like Springfield is it's eliminated or nearly eliminated art, music, social studies, civics, home and careers, shop, athletics at the middle school level. These are areas where kids connect with adults and know that they have someone who cares about them. And they can give them the kind of skills, they call them soft skills. There's nothing soft about them. How to be resilient, how to stick to a task and carry it through to fruition. How to work with one another. The golden rule. We need to bring these things back into public education, especially in places like Springfield. And the two things, the most important things the legislature could do is deal with that crooked yardstick accountability system and fund the schools appropriately so that they can get the resources that these kids need to survive and thrive. There's a hell of a lot more involved in becoming a positive, productive human being, a good neighbor, a good parent, that can be measured on any standardized test. And we've gone way over the limit on putting the value on the test and not putting the value on the growth of these kids.
Thank you, Tim. So I appreciate wholeheartedly appreciate and agree with all the sentiment expressed there. I'm actually a co-sponsor of the bill you mentioned around standardized testing, and on the foundation budget review, I'm also a co-sponsor of that. The reality of it is, unfortunately, we're in a situation statewide of dwindling revenues, and we really need to organize and fight to make sure that items like student loan issues and adequate and really what has been promised funding of public education is actually realized. We are facing a situation in particular in Western Massachusetts where our communities are facing tighter and tighter and tighter and tighter budget pictures for a variety of reasons, largely due to economic forces far beyond our control, which makes it even more important that we both fight for that funding and we take on some of the underlying causes of those disparities in the first place, which you just very eloquently brought up. I wanted to just touch on, because my guess is that there's probably questions about the empowerment zone as well, and you referenced that in your statement, Tim. So I thought I would proactively just talk about that for a second, and then we'll go back to answering some more questions. So Springfield is actually in the midst of what I really think is a really exciting initiative around the empowerment zone. It's obviously not perfect, but I think the model that has been proven in Springfield really has the potential to be a beacon for the rest of the Commonwealth and potentially the rest of the country. For people who aren't familiar with what's happening here, a group of 9 middle schools and now a high school of commerce, proactively, with Tim's leadership and others coming to the table in a really collaborative way, decided to create this empowerment zone, which is a basically shared relationship between the city, local community leaders, the state, and a nonprofit entity called Empower Schools, to bring some more decision-making authority and management authority to the local level, to the principal and to the school level. There have been 2 full school years of this model at the 9 middle schools, and we're now in the beginnings of a 3rd school year. There is not hard data yet, which is important stipulation, because we haven't gotten enough far enough into the academic years to collect it all, but there is quite a lot of qualitative data and anecdotal data about just spirits being lifted and people feeling a renewed sense of optimism and energy about where these schools are heading. And it's attracted a lot of attention. I've gotten asked from a lot of legislators all over the state about this model, about how it's working, and whether or not it's a model that can be used in other communities that Tim mentioned, like New Bedford or Lawrence or Holyoke, that are facing some of these same challenges with their public school system. So the bill I have would allow this model to be expanded school districts. And it's still in committee. It's still under the review process. It's by far not perfect. But I do think that we really have an opportunity for Springfield to lead on a really important, really transformative initiative that really avoids what I thought were some of the biggest drawbacks of charter schools, which is why I haven't supported the expansion of charter schools. It keeps money in the district. It keeps resources local. It uses existing teachers, existing principals, existing school structures, but it does allow for some of the reforms and some of the things like expanded learning time. At Duggan, there's an hour more of math instruction that there hadn't been before. So it allows for a level of flexibility and of new creativity in the curriculum that you weren't able to do previously. So I think it's very exciting. It's new. It's obviously not perfect. There's going to be differences of opinion about it, but I do think that we got to give our local leadership here and the folks engaged in the community a chance to respond, so and a chance to let it play out. So, Tim, I'm going to just ask that we let others speak, and then we want to give everyone a chance to talk, and then we can come back at the end. Okay? So, is there anyone else who has a comment? Tim, go ahead.
Senator, I'm going to follow up on Tim Collins's point about the crooked yardstick. My son was a teacher last year at Chestnut North, and the crooked yardstick, the crooked measure, was that the school and the students are judged based on the MCAS, but there were a number of children in my son's class who were coming to school direct from Puerto Rico. They couldn't read English, they couldn't write English, but they're being tested. Their teacher and their principals are being graded on these kids who are not English literate, and that is, to follow up on Tim's comment, a crooked yardstick, that the principals, the teachers, the school is based upon measures that anyone can see is going to give you a failure, and the empowerment zone, with all the promise it has yet to address this fundamental flaw. And going forward, if you're going to try to measure it fairly, you've got to make sure that you're accounting for these differences.
Yeah, I think that's completely right. And there's a group of legislators that have been working on trying to broaden out how we measure whether a school is successful or not. There's actually a variety of ways you can do it. You can look at growth, as Tim mentioned, and both Tims have mentioned, over time. You can look at, for example, just broader wraparound programming like civics education or arts and culture programming or after school enrichment. There's a lot of metrics and there's a lot of varieties of things that we can work on. And I agree that the MCAS-based standardized testing model is not working anymore, especially for communities that are facing a series of heightened challenges. I think we all agree, probably, that you need some level of objective standard to just see, to be able to compare school to school, to just see what people are absorbing or what they're not. But I think there's also a growing consensus in the state that it went overboard. And I think we're beginning to see that with legislation. We're seeing that with the moratorium bill, which is gaining steam each year. And the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education is actually in the midst of a pretty holistic review of AMCAS. They're calling it MCAS 2.0. I was actually the first class, my high school graduating class was the first class in Massachusetts where the MCAS count. So I feel like I've sort of seen the arc of this test, and it's gotten way overboard. Like when you have kindergarten kids having panic attacks because of standardized testing regimes, that's a big problem. And I have concerns also, frankly, about the labeling, because I think it is inherently unfair. And when you label those schools in these overly general ways, you label the community, it impacts property values, it impacts ability to attract businesses. So there's a lot of challenges with it. And so we need to dive into this, and we need to unravel it. The empowerment zone is one of a multiple number of things that we need to do simultaneously to tackle. And I really applaud your son for taking that on. That's a very, very tough gig. I mean, being a teacher is like among the most admirable things a person can do in this society, so he really deserves our thanks and appreciation for it. And luckily, we do have the MCAS 2.0 effort underway, which will give us an opportunity to make some of those changes. Christine.
Hi, Eric. Christine Goonan, Senate District Coordinator for MTA. I'm a public school teacher. One of the things that has bothered me over the years with all the standardized testing and DESE putting all of these standards and rigor into a curriculum and not giving educators time to actually get that curriculum going is that we've never had a voice at the table. Educators have never been asked what's happening. We're the boots on the ground. We're the ones in the classroom. And to me, we've never had a voice to advocate for the children that we teach. You know, we teach with our heart, we teach with our brains, we teach for our children to learn. And Eric, I just want to know if you would be committed in getting some teachers on the voting members on the Department of Elementary and Secondary Ed so that we could add our voices as this new formulations you were saying about how they're looking at standardized testing, because we're the ones that actually really know what's going on in the classroom. We see those kids' faces day of MCAS when they're freaking out, crying, and have difficulty focusing. And the multiple of testing that we're doing in our system to track kids' progress. We're testing kids 3, 4, 5 times a year. Forget about MCAS, we're doing it every 3 months. Online, on a computer. There's a lot going on that I think the public needs to see what's going on. There's not really a lot of teaching going on when you're testing. So I would really like to promote and ask you to personally advocate to get a couple of educators on the Board of Education as the voices of the boots on the ground.
No, it's thanks, Christine. And Christine has been with us this is now the 3rd of 3 town halls this month. So knows I'm a fan of engagement and dialogue. And yeah, I mean, that's an easy one, frankly. And there is a bill requiring that change. I honestly, I'm relatively new to this. I'm going to be in office 3 years in January, and I was kind of confused and surprised when there wasn't a teacher on the board of the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. Kind of seems like common sense. So, no, it's definitely something I support, and it's a bill that we're working on. So, and I truly don't know why it's even controversial. I mean, I guess I have a sense that that the makeup is the makeup, and if you start adding people, but it seems to me like a pretty rational, common sense thing to do. Anyone else? Oh, Linda, go ahead. Oh, go. We'll do 1 then 2, or 1 then 2.
Hello, Senator Lesser. Thank you for doing this. Linda O'Connell from the League of Women Voters. The League is in support of a single-payer health care system for the Commonwealth. And I believe last year you were very vocal in support of that also. Either I'm blind or I don't see your name as a co-sponsor on this year's bill by Senator Eldridge, I believe. So would you talk about your position on that?
No, I mean, I believe healthcare is a human right, and our goal needs to be universal access. There's a bunch of different bills, actually. I know Senator Eldridge's bill well. I was with him this morning, and every time I see him, we talk about it. And I want that bill to move forward. I want it to gain steam. I'm on a couple different bills related to universal healthcare. One has been filed by my colleague Julian Sear. And what that bill does is it requires the state to basically do a cost-benefit analysis every year for 5 years. And if after those 5 years they can't statistically and in a rigorous way demonstrate that a single-payer system would be, if they can show that the single-payer system would be less expensive than the current model, including all the costs, premiums, deductibles, out-of-pocket expenses, it would trigger a movement to single payer. I think, frankly, that's the approach we need to take because we do have work to do. It's moving fast, and I'm excited by the movement, but we have work to do to build the organic and the grassroots support to make that, to make that a reality. My thought process on it, well, let's get the data we need on a state level to then be able to persuasively make that case for what would be a major, major change. But I'm a big fan of what's happening. I'm really glad to see this. If you believe healthcare is a human right, and if you start from that principle, you have to figure out a pathway to get to universal access, or else you're acknowledging that it's not a human right because you're letting people off. The way I think about healthcare, and the way I would kind of encourage people sort of conceptually to think about it, is I really think about it as 3 elements. So the first element of healthcare is quality. So we actually do a very good job with quality in Massachusetts. We have the best hospitals in the world, the best doctors. I think it's well established how good the Massachusetts healthcare system is. And so we do want to maintain quality. That's very, very important. So the number one, or not number one in order, but one element is quality. Second element that's really important for people to think about with healthcare is access. You can have very high quality healthcare, you can have fantastic doctors, you can have great hospitals, but if people can't actually see the doctor because it's too expensive, or use the hospital because they can't afford it, it doesn't matter much. The third element that I really, prism I use to really analyze healthcare policy is cost. And in terms of cost, Massachusetts does an absolutely awful job. We do a good job on quality. We have very, very high quality healthcare system. We do a decently good job vis-a-vis the rest of the country on access. We're at 98%, which is way beyond any other state. We obviously want to get to 100, but compared to the rest of the country, we're way ahead on access. Where we're actually dead last in the country is on cost. We have a just completely out of control healthcare system. I see this just with EpiPens, for an example, which was an issue that I just worked on that we got a big accomplishment on. So my kind of prism on healthcare is, until we get to universal access, which is something I support and something I want to see happen, we've got to make sure that whatever we're doing right now moves the ball forward on access, on cost, and on quality. So I've really been really gratified. Despite what we're seeing on a national level, or maybe because of what we're seeing on a national level, we've seen all this energy locally.
Thank you for your clear thinking on that.
Thanks, Linda. Oh, there was. Oh. Did you? Okay.
Good evening, and thank you for holding this. I have a question, but it's on a totally different topic, but I think it's a question you're going to like, because I'm very interested in high-speed rail. I really do think that will be an economic engine for the city of Springfield, and so many of the programs we're talking about, especially some of the school programs, I mean, you do need investments, and you do need the finances, and you need the help with the state budget, but I do think that would go a long way, not only for Springfield, but east-west. And I hear so many people saying, that will never happen. I say, yes, I think it will. And ask Eric Lesser. So I'm asking you, what is the status, and what can we look forward to with that economic engine?
Well, thank you, Kateri, for bringing that up. I appreciate it. So I thought maybe I want to just zoom out for a second and talk about why it's important and why I focus on this so much. And, actually it includes all the reasons that have just been brought up. Karen's point about student loans, Tim Collins and Tim Ryan's point about the Springfield schools and the MCAS and the measurement challenges, Linda's point about healthcare are actually all, I think, pretty intertwined with the fundamental challenge we face in Western Massachusetts, which is, as our economy has shifted from an industrial-based economy to one that's focused on innovation and technology, we have made some progress, but frankly have fallen very far behind other parts of our Commonwealth and other parts of our country. And unless we figure that out, unless we make that transition, and unless we create growth and create local opportunity here in Western Mass, we will not get the opiate crisis under control, and we will not get the issues plaguing our schools under control, and we will not be able to solve healthcare, because we're not going to have the tax base and the economic activity we need to make it work. Let me just ask a question of the crowd here. How many people have family members, kids, neighbors, friends who they grew up with, who they raised, or who grew up in Springfield, or who grew up in this area and who moved, or who don't live locally anymore? If you have family, friends, kids, coworkers, basically everyone. And so people ask, will it be so expensive, or is it feasible, or what is the cost going to be? I don't think anyone is trying to pretend this is going to be some easy project, but the question that needs to be asked is, what's the cost of not doing it? And what's the cost of continuing to allow an entire region of the state to fall further and further behind, while an economy just to the east of us in Boston and just to the south of us in New York is as hot and growing as fast as it's ever grown before? That's not sustainable, and frankly, it's not fair. And the other thing I would just say is, our taxes help pay for the big dig, and are still paying for the big dig. Our sales taxes support the MBTA, still support the MBTA. And my guess is actually most of us in this room would gladly pay our fair share, because we understand how important dynamic and growing Boston is for the whole state and for the economy of our whole New England region. But the deal has to be fair. And if the money and the investment and the intention is always flowing in one direction, that's a recipe for disaster long term, and it's deeply unfair to our families. And I don't think somebody's future potential should depend on the zip code where they live. I think everyone should have the same access to jobs and to opportunity, and it should depend on how hard they work and how much they hustle, not on where they live or who their parents are or what family they come from. And that's why it's important. And so that's why, quite frankly, I'm going to file this bill every single year I'm there. I'm going to attach it to every single budget we do, because it is, I believe, the overriding issue we have in Western Massachusetts is, how are we going to be able to connect ourselves to the growth and the opportunity that we see all around us. We have to take that on, and we have to have a real conversation as a community and stand up for ourselves and start to demand the same attention and respect that other areas get. So that's why I'm doing it, and that's why I'm focused on it. In terms of the nuts and bolts of where we are now, we still have a bill. The bill is in the Transportation Committee. The bill will have a hearing very soon, this fall. And then we're going to need everybody's help and support to make noise and get out there and make the case again. We have broad bipartisan support on this initiative. We have 25 co-sponsors, Republicans and Democrats. We have more actually getting added all the time. We have a really bipartisan group, Republicans and Democrats, working on this. It's passed the Senate 39-0 3 years in a row. And actually, very interestingly, it's an initiative that's enthusiastically supported both by the Boston Chamber of Commerce and the Springfield Chamber of Commerce. How often do you see that? The reason you see that happening is because the single biggest challenge Boston has is out of control cost of living, out of control rent. No one can afford to live there. The traffic is awful. It's just terrible. And frankly, Amazon might not come to Boston despite the fact that it has so many assets, because it's just too crowded and there's nowhere to go and there's nowhere to put it. Well, we have the inverse challenge, which is we have great schools, we have a really great civic community, civic leadership, doing these initiatives around empowerment zone, all kinds of other things. We have great quality of life. We have very low cost of living vis-a-vis our neighboring regions. What we lack is enough fastly growing, high-paying jobs to retain and attract more investment and more families. So a great exchange can happen. Boston gets access to more affordable cost of living, higher quality of life. Western Mass gets access to higher paying jobs. So we're going to focus on it. Unfortunately, we've faced some deeply entrenched interests, but that's frankly why we do town halls like this and why we communicate with the public, because we need people shedding light on this and making some noise and standing up and demanding investment for our communities.
Thank you, Eric.
Thanks, Kerry.
Good evening, Senator. Thank you for being here and for doing this. My name is Jesse Letterman. I'm a candidate for the Springfield City Council at large, and one of the things that I've talked about in my campaign and that I've discussed with constituents across the city is how elected officials, especially locally, can work better together to advance progress for the city of Springfield. So my question to you is, what can local elected officials do from Springfield to support legislation like high-speed rail that's going on in Boston and do a better job supporting our state legislators that are headed out there to represent us?
Oh, what a question. Thanks, Jesse. So actually, quite frankly, Springfield's been a fantastic partner, not just on rail, but on a whole host of issues. I have a very close relationship with Mayor Sarno. He came out enthusiastically for the rail proposal, has lobbied for it, has been right there with us on it. City Council under Councilor Walsh's leadership and Councilor Shea, and Councilor Allen. Put out two years in a row, fantastic resolutions of support for the rail initiative. We have a great working relationship, I feel, with all of our councilors, and we work together on parks funding, on schools issues, all the time. I chair our Gateway Cities Caucus. We have a local aid funding formula rewrite that we're working with the city administration on, and trying to get a better understanding of their municipal finances and how we can, again, going back to crooked yardsticks and state measurements, how we can adjust those formulas to better serve gateway cities like Springfield. So I think the relationship is actually really good. It can always be improved, and there can always be more, because frankly there's always more issues. But I think engagements like this, and it's a two-way street. It's not just about me asking for help from the city for things we're working on in Boston. It's the city being really proactive with us about what they need. The empowerment zone is a good example of that. The work, the collaborative effort around Union Station, which was really a combination of local, state, and federal money and resources all working together. CRRC, back to this idea of linking Eastern and Western Massachusetts and stitching them together rather than continuing to have them drift apart. The rail plant is a perfect example. Let's admit it, we don't like paying for the MBTA because we don't benefit from the MBTA. But if they start making the MBTA rail cars in Springfield and hiring local people from Springfield to build those rail cars, that helps stitch those economies together, because now you're helping both ends of the state. Boston gets those new rail cars, and we get some really, really good, high-paying jobs, a lot of them, to build them and bring back manufacturing to Western Massachusetts. So I think there's a lot of examples of ways we have worked together, and there's a lot of stuff where I think we need to do even more. I'll just say, another great example, this is just flow of consciousness here, but there is some really awesome, really exciting work happening in Stern Square and in downtown around the Cultural District, and all the ancillary development happening around Union Station. Mass Development, state has worked really closely with the city government, with the city council, on new investments in arts and cultural programming, new innovation center, new maker space. There's a new restaurant district that's going to provide lower interest loans to entrepreneurs who want to start restaurants there. And it's working. There's stuff happening. There's activity. People are excited. And it's part of a broader set of developments that are happening with the Dr. Seuss Museum, again, a local state partnership. Obviously, the MGM casino complex is a heavy state investment there. So the goal, I think, is to kind of break the silos down and sort of think through how all of these things are actually integrated with each other, rather than thinking, okay, that's a state project, go talk to the state senator, oh, that's a city project, go talk to the city councilor, or oh, that's a private job thing, talk to the Chamber of Commerce or something. Thank you. Yeah.
Hi, Eric. Hi, I'm Tracy Whitfield, also running for City Council at large. My question is around gun violence. We know that it's happening. Is there any proven models that you are researching to bring into the city to combat gun violence? I'm actually studying one called Cure Violence. It's a proven model, been around since, I believe, 1999. I guess Queens, an area of Queens already have that model, and they're celebrating their 1 year of no gun violence right now. So I'm wondering if you are studying any models like that to combat the gun violence in Springfield, and if not, can we talk about the model I'm studying? Thank you.
Well, I would like to learn about that model because I'm not familiar with it, so we should sync up, and I'd love to read more about it. Question was about gun violence, an awful, awful issue that's plaguing a lot of our communities certainly all over Massachusetts, but frankly all over the country. I'll just share just a story. I had a group of students at Putnam sent me letters. There was a class of about 20 students, and they all wrote to me about gun violence issues. This was about 3 weeks ago or so. I got the letters right when school started. And we went in and they asked for a response, and I was thinking about writing the response out, and then finally I was like, we should just go talk to them. Number one, it's easier than writing all the responses, and also I wanted to kind of have a conversation with them about what was going on. So we went, we had a really fantastic time. I mean, we talked for a while. It was a really wonderful group of young people who were really thoughtful and had some great suggestions. There's a couple things. Number one, Massachusetts does have among the strictest, I think we kind of go back and forth with Connecticut on the strictest gun control laws. You know, we have to do this while respecting Second Amendment rights. We are the home of Smith & Wesson right up the street. We have a long history of sportsmanship and of legal gun ownership. There are some places where we can make some changes. For example, tightening some of the straw purchase issues. We can do a better job of cracking down on the resale and on the illegal gun trade. But we can do a little bit of a better job on technology around tracing and helping law enforcement kind of spot and track guns. We've done a lot of work with getting Springfield more resources for the shot spotter technology, for example, and we can better enhance that so that you can actually pinpoint it to specific weapons. But quite frankly, this is an issue that needs a federal response because, you know, we can do everything we can in Massachusetts, but if someone buys a gun in Vermont and drives down Interstate 91, there's not a lot we can do. We can beef up police patrols, we can improve community policing, we can crack down on background checks, there's a lot to do and that we have done, but this is why we really need the US Congress and we need the federal government engaged on this, because ultimately we're getting flooded with illegal guns coming from other places, coming from overseas, coming from states with weaker gun laws, and we need cross-border collaboration, and the only entity really able to do that is the federal government. So there are specific things we can do kind of on the margins in Massachusetts to better enhance what we already have, but probably the most effective thing we can do, quite frankly, is continue to make the case as impassioned as we can on a federal level. And I think people should be outraged about the lack of responsiveness we're seeing on this issue and on a whole host of issues on a federal level. Yeah.
Good evening. Thank you for coming, Senator. I work for the city of Springfield, and one reason why I work in the public sector is because there's an openness of records and there's nothing proprietary. But I can't say that for my friends that work in the private sector. I saw a little bit of some news about having, with regards to not so much a no poaching, but non-competitive agreements and a possible abolishing of that. Is that going to be possible on the agenda?
Great question. This is a pet issue of mine. I'm really into this. So the question was on non-competes. I don't support them at all. I think that they're a form of indentured servitude, frankly. I'm happy to get into this a little bit. This is a little bit of a niche issue, but I'm happy to talk about this in more depth with people. But this has had major consequences for Massachusetts and has actually really hurt our economy in some big existential ways. Let me just give you an example. One of the places that they're most aggressively used is in the tech sector, in the tech community. In the 1980s, Massachusetts was like the hot state for tech. We had Wang computers. The 128 corridor was like Silicon Valley. It was really where everyone thought, you know, everyone thought we were going to be Silicon Valley, and we were going to be the place where every big, or Massachusetts was going to be the place where every big invention was going to happen. Massachusetts enforced very strictly non-competes. So really talented engineers, people working in the technology sector, didn't want to work in Massachusetts because if they were working at some big company and had a great idea and wanted to go start their own business on their own or wanted to go to a different firm, they weren't able to do that because they were locked into these really restrictive agreements that literally wouldn't let them or would subject them to massive lawsuits or legal exposure. California, being the kind of Wild West, didn't enforce non-compete agreements at all. They didn't even have them on the books. And what it created was a much more dynamic, much more open economy where engineers, where data scientists, where tech employees would hop around from startup to startup and could jump in and out of different industries and innovations without fear of this entrapment from the non-compete clauses. So what happened? Well, little by little, we had Wayne Computers, we had EMC, we had all these big iconic companies, and then all of a sudden, Apple, Facebook, Amazon, Microsoft, every big company basically after 1985 that was involved in technology was founded in California, not in Massachusetts. And we're still hurting from that decision. Give you just two examples. Bill Gates actually invented Microsoft in Massachusetts. He was a student at Harvard University, moved back to Washington to grow it there. Imagine if Microsoft was based in Massachusetts. Mark Zuckerberg, I know he was a college fraternity brother of mine, invented Facebook in Cambridge, Massachusetts. He got his first investors in Cambridge, Massachusetts, moved the entire company to San Francisco. There are a lot of reasons why, but one of them, a major reason, was enforcement of non-competes. Imagine if Facebook had stayed in Massachusetts. You know, talking about these bigger issues we have like healthcare and drug addiction and everything else. Imagine if just those two companies, there are literally hundreds of examples like that. So this is a big issue. The state Senate filed a bill to do away with non-competes last session. There had been multiple efforts over years and years and years. We passed it. It passed on a pretty overwhelming vote. Didn't make it through the House or to the governor's desk. There are about 3 or 4 different proposals this year to also do away with them. I support all of them and am an enthusiastic supporter of them. And we're hoping that maybe we'll get more traction this year. And then just a follow-on issue around private employment is issues around patent trolling and intellectual property protections. We have some really anachronistic laws in Massachusetts. 33 other states have caught up with the times and have changed some of their laws around this. We haven't, which has also put us at a major disadvantage. I'm sure that one of the factors Amazon is looking at when they contemplate moving here is the enforceability of non-competes. It's a big deal in the tech sector.
Yes, sir. Bob Torville from Wilbraham, and thank you again for sharing all this time and being around. I do have a question, and I'll get to it at the end. But first, I have to start with a bigger issue. We're moving into a new economy. They don't even know what to call it. It's an automated economy. It's an economy of robots, economy of less labor. And we've been on this topic, I think, is so important because you do want to help people, and there's a lot of people out there that need help, not only the younger generation saddled with student debt, but the older generation that were hitting their stride in the 50s and lost their jobs and are so afraid to even talk about it. They're so embarrassed. So people are going to need a lot of help. So we're going to need economic progress. And my question I'll get to, but I want to illustrate it through my friend John, and a bigger picture is that the Federal Reserve wonders, everybody wonders why wages aren't going up. When the unemployment looks so low, why isn't there competition for workers? Why aren't wages going up? Why aren't we coming out of this recession stronger, faster than we have before? And the big fight is, one side's going to say, oh, it's all those regulations. Those regulations are killing business. But that's not true. There was an article in the New York Times, and it's suggesting that maybe regulation's part of the problem, but the bigger problem is big companies are eating the small companies. The big companies are preventing the small companies from starting. So there's a lack of, the fact is, there's a lack of startups. Startups has dwindled. Now, I want to get to my friend John. So John has a motorcycle, he sells motorcycle parts. He has a big warehouse. And like a lot of people, the platforms of Amazon and what's the other one? eBay, you know, they've been established. So these people, like my friend John, they have to do business on those big companies. And those companies are demanding larger commissions and imposing more penalties. And so they're stuck. Now, I know you can't do anything about that, but getting back to startups and regulations. John also mentioned that Massachusetts did a wonderful thing. He said it was very smart. He printed T-shirts. So in Massachusetts, there are regulations involved with printing because some printing involves very bad chemicals. And, you know, so penalties are imposed. Well, what Massachusetts did was send a letter to everybody who did any kind of printing and said, hey, if you come to this symposium in Worcester for 2 days and you've committed a small infraction in the past, you'll be forgiven. And not only that, we will help you learn how to comply with those regulations. So what I'm saying is hopefully we can do more of that so that we don't get blamed as regulating, which is protections that we all need, isn't responsible for starting, you know, for preventing the startups from happening. And we can bring more startups here to Massachusetts, to Western Massachusetts, so we can have an economy again. Thank you.
Well said. Well, the whole big topic about automation and what we do about that, we'll address that later because I think the heart of your question was about you know, regulatory policy and small businesses. Is that right? And what we do about regulations. So look, it's a great political science puzzle, right? If you ask somebody, do you support regulations? No, I hate regulations. And then you ask someone, well, do you like clean drinking water? And do you like clean air? And do you like workers to be in safe environments where their hands don't get chopped off and where 13-year-olds don't have to work 100 hours a week? And they say, oh, yeah, of course, I want all that. So I think the challenge is always to make sure that we're disciplined about making sure regulations are on point to the social good that they're aimed to promote, that they're there for specific reasons, and that they do get updated as times change and as the economy changes. I mean, NonCompetes is an example of a regulation that I'm sure when it was put in place at some point 70, 80, 100 years ago, there was very legitimate reason for it. And the economy evolved and the need for it evolved and it ended up being very harmful. So I think, you know, if we believe in the state's role to promote the public welfare, to protect health and safety, then we also have to make sure that those provisions and those regulations that promote that are on point, are relevant, are well enforced, and are coherent and easy to understand for that average person, because there is a barrier to entry for small businesses, understanding all of these different things. We deal with restaurants all the time that are trying to open, that are trying to navigate this. I mean, the city councilors probably appreciate and deal with this all the time. We need to do a better job making it less complicated and making it easier to understand and digest. The regulations often can and should be there, and they should be strongly enforced, and they're usually there often there for good reason, but there's no reason why it has to be so complicated and why people have to burn up so much time and energy. And frankly, it shouldn't depend on the quality of your lawyer, whether your business succeeds. It should depend on how good your idea is and how hard you work at it. Great question. Anyone else?
Okay, my name's Gary Walsh, and God bless you for being here, but I'm about to put you through a nightmare. We've talked about education, we've talked about students, we've talked about eBays and all those other things. I'm a little bit more down to earth. I've just signed my Social Security papers, so I'm now among the retired. I also got in the mail that Equifax has lost all my information, and I could be subject to losing every nickel I made in the last 55 years. How do we go about, or what can be done in the state of Massachusetts to protect its citizens from This is a nationwide event. 143 million people can now pay $5 to get a year's worth of credit checks. What happens in 15 years when some guy comes up and says, oh, we just bought a place in Cancun on your retirement money?
Yeah.
I hate those things. How can that function in today's society when people are tied into 3 organizations that control whether I get a loan, whether I can keep the loan, and if you lose my information, I've got to pay you to protect me from what you did wrong. I guess the point that I'm getting to, or what I'm trying to find out, is where do we start putting responsibility on not only Equifax, but Hartford Steam Boiler Insurances. I'm also a diabetic. I have found out that my insulin will now cost me almost $1,000 a month, and it's not covered by insurance. All my life, we heard the jokes as young people, who the hell is that guy named FICA? What's he doing with my money? Okay, that's a question to be asked. Who is FICA and what has he done with my money? I'm going to be on Medicare because that's what I put in for literally, I'm not kidding, 55 years. I've been working since about 10 years old picking tobacco. And, oh, well, you know, it's not all there anymore. Maybe you'll have enough if my wife and I didn't put some money aside and say, hey, we're going to be okay. I'm scared now because I don't know where my money is. And I did the right things. How do we get corporations, insurance companies, Big Money America, whoever you want to call them, to sit there and be responsible to the people they made these promises to? How do we do that? What can the state of Massachusetts? We talk about how great we are. We're the best at this, we're the best at that, we're the best at this. I also happen to was on Mass Health. Every letter I got from Mass Health had a page on it, had a page in it that had, I never counted them, but probably 50 translations to say if I have a problem, call this number. And it comes every month. One piece of paper for how many thousands of people, millions of people in Massachusetts? What's that come up to in dollars? We need to save money as a organization, the state of Massachusetts, but we need to protect our citizens. What can be done for that, and what's in place, or what are you guys looking at?
No, it's Gary, you said?
Yeah.
Yeah, Gary. I really appreciate you bringing this up, actually.
I gotta go sit down.
Yeah. You're good. We got it. Quite frankly, there isn't an easy answer. And, just backing up a second on one of the points that you made about all those entities you just mentioned are not elected officials. They're not government. There's no real accountability in our system for a company. I mean, has anyone ever stopped and asked, how did a company like Equifax get to be so big that they can do something like that? And basically, the current legal regime is just woefully inadequate to the challenges. Has anyone asked why not a single person, went to prison for the Great Recession or for ripping off millions and millions of homeowners in every state in this country? Yeah, exactly. They got rewarded. Yeah. So I think it's a really good question, and some of it is beyond the scope of what we can do in the state. We really do need federal partners, and we need Congress. There are some things happening right now on the Equifax situation. The Attorney General, Maura Healey, is suing them. So there is a suit in progress. She announced an investigation and a suit. It isn't going to be immediate. I mean, just being honest, because there's a process that has to go through to do the suit. But at least she did swing right in. They issued something. There's a bill pending that was filed shortly after the Equifax case that's pending right now. It just got filed around requiring disclosure in order to operate in Massachusetts. That's something I support. I think we need to move forward on with it. But what has happened is an outrage, and unfortunately, it's the tip of the iceberg, because everything that we do, imagine if a major credit card company got hacked, or exposed credit card information, or any big bank in this country. We have some major issues with the consolidation of these companies and of this financial power. And it's people like us, frankly, it's normal people who get the short end of it in the long run. So it's something I care about a lot. I grapple with, myself, how to handle it. Let me give you one anecdote, or not, one example. So I had done work around the cost of Narcan last term. This is an example of a little bit of what you're handling. Narcan is an anti-overdose drug. So it was selling at $16 a dose. The Amphastar Pharmaceuticals, the drug company, was selling it for $16 a dose. And then the governor declared a state of emergency around opiates, and the price almost overnight went from $16 a dose to $66 a dose. And so we were like, what's going on here? And they kept saying, this is supply and demand, there's no price gouging, there's nothing we can do about it, that, it's like an airline ticket, it just, a lot of people need it now and we can't keep up with the supply. Well, then we filed a bill in the Senate to provide for bulk purchasing of Narcan, the same way Walmart or Costco has a lower price because they buy in bulk. The state was not doing that because they didn't have the legal structure to buy in bulk. So we filed a bill to create that structure to allow them to buy in bulk. All of a sudden, the price ticked down after the bill was filed. Well, I thought that you guys said that this was supply and demand and there was nothing you could do about it. Then the governor made a comment publicly that he supported bulk purchasing and it was something that he would be supportive of. Price ticked down even more. Then the vote happened, the price continued to tick down. We finally got the bill passed, brought them to the table. The price has now been steady at $22 a dose, which is a lot better than it was at $66 a dose, but is obviously not as low as it had started at 16. But we'll take it because it was a big accomplishment. And we got them to chip in a year's supply of Narcan for the cities and towns participating in this program that they did. They say free of charge, but it was like their company put the money in that they had built from people for years before that to make it work. So, they went from saying that there was no problem and no price gouging to immediately coming to the table once the laws were changed. So fast forward to this session, I was going door to door, and a lot of people had mentioned to me, that the price of EpiPens, similar to what you had said, what medicine was $1,000, or the insulin, yeah, very similar situation. So EpiPens, they cost like $3 to make. It's a technology that is 30 years old. And the company that owns EpiPen didn't invent EpiPens. They bought the patent, I think in 2006 or 2007. Once they owned the patent and the intellectual property, they started jacking the price up because they could, because they had a monopoly. The price went from, I think, $100, $120 a dose to as much as $900 a dose. And so an ER doctor at Mercy, Dr. Mark Kenton, fantastic guy, really sees it all at the emergency room at Mercy Hospital. I got connected to him through a constituent, and he was telling me a story about how he would be in his emergency room at Mercy and he would see like young mothers come in who had to decide between their kid risking dying of a bee sting or taking out a loan to purchase one EpiPen. By the way, kids often need them in multiple places because if you're at school, if you're at camp, if you're on the bus, you need them in all these different places in case you get bit. And so he wrote this letter to the Mylan CEO that he put on Facebook, and it went viral. Literally, it got shared thousands of times. He was on the Today Show. It was pretty cool. And so we were thinking about it, and our team put our heads together, and we said, actually, Narcan and EpiPens are similar in that they're similar kind of distribution patterns. Schools use them, police, ambulances. It's a similar kind of network of how you get it out to people. So we filed a bill this year on bulk purchasing of EpiPens. I read Dr. Kenton's letter on the floor of the Senate. It was, you could hear a pin drop. I mean, his letter was unbelievable. I'll repost it on Facebook. I've posted it before, but people can check it out on my Facebook page. And you could hear a pin drop. And they fought us and fought us and fought us, said we can't do this, we can't add this, we can't do this, et cetera, et cetera. And then the vote was unanimous once this letter got read and everyone was put on the spot to vote yes or vote no. And to their credit, the House got it through also, and then Governor Baker did sign it. And so it's now the law, and we're going to get the price of EpiPens down. My hope, it hasn't kicked in yet, but my hope is we're going to be able to get the price of EpiPens down as a result. So that's just one drug, and obviously it doesn't even begin to scratch the surface of everything that we have going on. But I do feel like it's a good example of empowerment in the sense that in a world that feels completely overwhelming right now and like the cards are all stacked against us, Mark Kenton stood up and pointed out something that was really unfair, a real injustice, and has been able to make real tangible progress towards making it a little bit more fair and a little bit more equitable, and that's what we need to do with Equifax. But we need to get these consumer protections beefed up. I mean, the Student Loan Bill of Rights we were just talking about is another example of that. I mean, I cannot tell you what is controversial about making sure that a 25-year-old kid trying to pay off their loans doesn't get phone banged for 20 times on Christmas. Like, why is this even like a controversy? But they fight it. They throw up all these roadblocks. They give all these explanations. They hire armies of lobbyists and lawyers to fight it at every point. So the only antidote to that is engagement, and we need people kind of calling them out on it and spotting them on it. I'm sorry to hear, by the way, that you're going through that. It's a scary situation. So. They profited off their own stupidity, yeah. And that connects back, frankly, to the universal health care. We think, everyone says, well, universal health care is going to be so expensive. Well, it's not like the current system is such a walk in the park right now. And if you actually add up what people pay with premiums, out-of-pocket expenses, deductibles, denials from insurance companies, this is why I'm enthusiastic about Julian Sears' bill, because I'm pretty confident the objective data is going to come back showing that a single-payer system is the way to go. Every other Western country seems to have figured this out, so it's a mystery to me why in America it's so tough. So, thank you. Do you have? I just want to make sure everyone who hasn't spoken, and then we'll do. Go ahead.
My question is relative to an issue that's happening that affects Western Mass and the cultural economy, the creative economy. Up in the Berkshires, there presently is a director and a board of trustees that has decided to gut the art collection and sell the Norman Rockwells, Alexander Calders, and so forth on an open auction, which means that they'll probably be bought by Chinese oligarchs, hang in their living room. But the people are very upset about it, and yet we're getting stonewalled by the board. They're just ignoring us till the clock runs out. My point is that this whole issue is of concern not only to the Berkshire Museum in Pittsfield, but part of this whole Massachusetts and even national cultural economy. How can we have people that are behaving recklessly and bringing, a negative status on, the Berkshires and the arts community there, and they've had condemnation from national museum organizations on ethics, Financially, they're claiming that they need to do this. The financials have been examined by many professionals in the field and outside, and they do not see where the financial need is warranted. But the people that are, the handful of people that are running things see, a $50 million jackpot that they can then invest, put in their banks that they run, who run the trustees and whatnot. And they're doing it under the guise of wanting to build a new science museum in the building that this currently houses. Anyway, long story short, we're talking here tonight about East and West connection. We're all one state, and yet the response that we're getting from there is that, it's a local issue. So how do we get past this? If we're going to be relying on our cultural institutions and our cultural economy as part of a statewide, push, and also they do receive state funding as well. So how do we make a stronger, presence or understanding that there needs to be more commitment to the public and the community by these nonprofits that are operating these organizations? Also, to your point too, Adam Hines is doing a north-south railway between Berkshires and New York City, and can we talk him into going east-west? Wouldn't that make more sense? I'm sorry, I grew up in Pittsfield. I've lived in Springfield for 30 years, but my heart is still in Pittsfield. I've worked at the museums in Springfield, and I understand the museum problems they're having up there. But the reality is that they are not even open to any other suggestions. They sent the artwork to Sotheby's before they even announced this project to the public. And that there's a lot, you can just go online and look at Save the Art. But anyway, my point is, if I know you used to be head of the cultural commission, in tourism. What would your prudent advice be about how to handle this situation? Because right now, the clock is ticking. We're waiting for the Attorney General to come back with something. But I'm really disappointed, I have to say, and one of them I grew up with, so I can say it, that the attitude of the politicians up there is, it's a local issue. Let me hear from my voters. Well, that's isolationist. And if you're trying to spread our community, we're all one state of Massachusetts, we all benefit whenever, all the boats are lifted, whenever, what, in your advice, with your background in the cultural economy, what would be the prudent way to handle this situation? Yeah. We're asking them to please pause the sale while these national groups and resources provide some guidance.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you bringing this up, Linda, because it's a big topic. I admittedly don't know a whole lot about it. I've been following the stories.
I'll send you stuff.
Yeah, no, so we'll have to get more up to speed. I think my observation, just from watching it kind of casually, is that these museums are saying that they're private entities and that they need to sell these relatively, undistinguished pieces in their collection that aren't out for display all the time to fund their other programming. Yeah. So I get it.
Yeah, they're not for display because they can't afford the insurance to display them. So
Exactly.
That's another whole management issue.
So I don't have a.
But anyway, so I know what you're saying. You don't have the details.
Yeah. So I'm answering. I'm answering.
Yeah.
So I don't have a great answer to that. They maybe have the legal right to do it. I think that it should be looked into. Quite frankly, they don't exist as completely private entities themselves, because they certainly don't make that claim when they ask the state for funding for their programming, and they almost all of them have tax-exempt 401c3 status, which means that they operate under some degree of public subsidy as well. So they have a broader mission beyond just the bottom line in their collection that has to be taken into account. So it should be looked into. But zooming out on arts and culture issues a little bit more broadly for the for the rest of the audience here, I'm a big believer in arts and culture programming and investment as a really important economic development tool, especially in Western Massachusetts. Last legislative session, I chaired our committee on arts, culture, and tourism. I still am the vice chair and remain very active, although now I'm chairing a different committee, but my current committee chairmanship is economic development, which is tightly intertwined with arts and culture. This is especially important in Western Mass. For every dollar we spend on arts and culture and tourism, there's actually a 7-fold return on investment. These are assets we have in Western Mass that inherently can't be outsourced. They're endemic to who we are and to our natural heritage. And so what that means is when people come here to visit the Norman Rockwell Museum, or
It's
they
our
come,
asset, it's who we
right,
are.
or they come
Yes.
to visit the Dr. Seuss Museum, or they come to visit, the Quadrangle, they stop and fill up their tank with gas, and they go buy a meal, and they stay overnight at a local hotel, and those are all inherently local jobs. That, again, can't be outsourced and are actually more rooted in family businesses and in family-owned and operated entities than other industries are. And also, if you look at communities like Springfield, we've talked a lot about kind of economic growth and rail and connectivity. If you look at communities like Springfield that have really successfully made the turn from an industrial era economy to an innovation creative economy, they do a bunch of things. One thing is they invest in their workforce development, in their education, in their kids, and in the next generation. Next thing that they do is they improve connectivity, things like rail lines and a better stitching the different regional economies together. And then the third thing that they do is they invest in a creative economy, because often the first entrepreneurs that will come into an area that's seen hard times are the artists, are the creative folks, are people doing different arts or cultural programming. And what we've seen time and time again, and there's been a lot of research on this, is if you create spaces for those types of industries and those types of businesses and those types of folks to congregate in and to invest in and to get started in, more traditional investment and more traditional businesses follow. So it's very, very, very important. And I've been distressed by the stories we've seen, because I mean, if there's anywhere where arts and culture is important, it's the Berkshires.
My concern is that this is also, it's become national news. We've become a pariah because of this situation. It's totally against every ethics of every museum, professional association, and so forth, what they're doing. So what's going to happen is that, and it happened in 1990, that donors will hesitate to donate. Not only just their money for operating funds and so forth, but also their collections. So we don't want to have this be the reputation that we have, that, a bunch of bumpkins up and, we don't know how to handle the good stuff,
So-
It seems to me there should be an incremental way to approach it, but I appreciate your insight into the fact that they're nonprofits and therefore they're not a totally private entity, and that they do seek public funds, and they do have the tax status that does give them a public responsibility or trust.
So I'm just watching the clock, and I want to be mindful of our great staff and team here that have been helping at Greenleaf, so I want to be respectful to them. But are there anyone who hasn't spoken yet? Have one, or we probably have time for 2 more questions. One, and then Stephen, did you? Oh, okay. So then I'll hang out for a little bit afterward, but we want to give them a chance to be able to start cleaning up and breaking so they can go home.
Hi, my question is about the 91 corridor, not only about drugs and it coming from the south all the way through up to the Berkshires, but also about human trafficking and what's being done about that.
Yeah, great question. Question was about human trafficking and what's being done. So this is an awful issue. I think actually one of the most important parts of this is actually getting out into the public that this is an issue. I really actually, we have to have some hard conversations in our communities about the fact that this is not only happening, but is actually shockingly prevalent. And I honestly don't think a lot of people are aware of just how much this is going on. So the first thing we really need to do is we need to educate the public, and we need to get the word out about what is happening and about how some of these networks are operating. And I have concerns that that it's going to get exacerbated with the casino. We want MGM to be successful. We're glad that they're here, but we have to have some adult conversations about how we make sure that issues like this get addressed. So we are actually, there's a couple of different bills. A colleague of mine who has probably the most expertise on the issue is named Mark Montigny. He's from New Bedford. And he has several bills he's filed over. He's been in office a while, and he has a number of bills he's filed over the years around human trafficking. There were a few that we undertook last session. The real key here is really kind of treating it similar to how organized crime syndicates had been kind of tracked and cracked in the past. You really need to break down silos among different law enforcement and allow these sort of fusion intel centers because, as you mentioned, they cross state lines, so you need FBI, federal government involved. A lot of times they follow, even though they're transnational and they cross state lines, they're often hyper-local in how they're organized, so you do need very close coordination with local law enforcement who know the local communities the best, and you need really close, sort of seamless integration with the actual community groups, people in the local community who will feel comfortable going to law enforcement when they see something that doesn't make sense or is out of place. And then we need to do a better job of creating pathways for the victims themselves to be comfortable to go to law enforcement. And unfortunately, a lot of them, either because of undocumented status or because of being concerned themselves with being punished, don't go to authorities when things happen or don't go to other community leaders. So we need to do a better job at that, which is one of the many reasons why I'm a co-sponsor of the Safe Communities Act, and I do think we need to move that forward. They're integrated into this. One item where this is going to come up is we are in the process of a pretty broad criminal justice reform plan, which is going to be proposed and debated this fall. Within a week or two, we're going to have a draft of that legislation, and that's going to be beginning to end, from investigations all the way through to post-trial and post-jail release programs and reintegration programs. And included in the investigation reform will hopefully be some components that will incorporate Senator Montigny's thoughts on human trafficking, and again, changing some of these wiretap laws and other statutes that have really been a hindrance to the cooperation. One model, I'll give you an example. We worked hard on getting some funding for a new Intel fusion cell in Springfield. It's based in Springfield, but it's for all of Western Mass to combat heroin trafficking. And the way this works is it's in consultation, a program with Sheriff's Office, District Attorney's Office, local police departments, FBI and federal agencies, and state police. And it's actually, I don't like using this analogy, but it's appropriate. It's based off a lot of what we've learned about intel sharing in the national security world and how you fight terrorism and dealing with things in Iraq and Afghanistan. You used to have issues with the CIA and the NSA and the DOD not talking to each other, and they've done a lot. They've done a lot to kind of break those silos down. So now we're pushing that down to civilian law enforcement, and it's really done a phenomenal job. I mean, we've seen just the seizures that have happened of the carfentanil and the fentanyl and these other things. While there's still a lot more that has to happen, a lot of those recent busts have been the product of these cooperative intel sharing agreements. And there's no reason why we can't apply that to other types of trafficking, right? It's being used for heroin trafficking, so you could apply it to human trafficking as well. So I would say that that's the approach we need to take. Getting some of the laws changed to allow better integration and coordination among different law enforcement, public awareness and getting the public notified that this is a big issue, and then building those trust networks so that victims themselves feel safer to come out of the shadows and to report issues. So I just want to make sure, has everyone who's wanted to speak spoken? Okay, so I'm going to just out of respect for making sure the facility closes in a timely way, I'll stick around for a while and we'll chat more in a more informal way.